This afternoon. Thankful the Lord has allowed us to be able to be here. And as we mentioned last time, we've signed a new lease, so we're going to be in this facility for at least a couple more years. Thankful that the Lord opened the door for that. Continue to pray for us as we look at potentially organizing. It's, I think, kind of the next thing we need to be looking at. So working toward that. So just keep us in your prayers as we go through those things. We are back in the book of Psalms chapter 78. Psalms chapter 78. We've been doing about one psalm every Sunday, but that, as we mentioned last time, is not going to happen in Psalms chapter 78. Psalms chapter 78 goes on for about 72 verses. And I think you guys know me well enough to know that I'm not making it through 72 verses in one sermon. Half the time I can't get through 3 verses in one sermon. So we'll see how this goes. Last time we did make it from verse 1 all the way down to about verse 8. And we ended with this idea that their fathers were a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart aright and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. That's kind of where we ended up last time. We learned a few things about Psalms chapter 78. There is part of this chapter that, of course, is quoted in the New Testament. When the Lord speaks in parables, it refers back to this chapter as it describes the way that the Lord is speaking in parables. Like he's uttering dark sayings of old, right? And he's revealing things, but he's revealing them things in mystery. And we talked a little bit about how and why he spoke in parables. Now, the other part to this chapter, though, is the practical application that the psalmist is talking about in passing down from generation to generation the things of God, who God is, what God has done, how God has blessed them, and the need to serve and to worship and remain faithful to God. That's really a pretty overarching theme in this psalm. And what most of the chapter deals with is giving examples of how the Lord had blessed and how the people rebelled anyways. How they forgot God and they suffered, and then they came back to God, and then God blessed, and then they forgot God. And why are we doing this? Remember last time we talked about, listen, we have a responsibility to tell our children what God has done for us, to teach them the things out of His Word, to make sure they understand and know why we believe what we believe. But this chapter also points out the idea, on the other side of the coin, we also need to be talking to our children about the examples of what happens when you don't serve God and when you don't follow God. Because those can be as much of a learning tool as me sitting down and telling you, here's the way to do this. You also need to know the consequences of not doing it that way. Okay? And it's important for us to know that. Sometimes as I think about different aspects of things, and I think about like maybe work where I've been training somebody on something, you do generally start with telling them the right way to do it, right? That's the basis. You tell them what they should do and how they should do it. But eventually you have to teach them how to troubleshoot it, which means you have to talk about what you do when it isn't done the right way, right? It's just as important to know what happens if you don't follow the instructions. And so Psalm chapter 78 is going to deal with that as well. Now if we pick up in verse 9, let's read from verse 9 down to verse 17. There's really not a good stopping place, but we'll read that section here. It says, "The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They kept not the covenant of God and refused to walk in His law, and forgot His works and His wonders that He had showed them. Marvelous things did He in the sight of their fathers, in the land of Egypt, in the field zone. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters to stand as an heap. In the daytime also he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. He clave the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink as out of the great depths. He brought streams also out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers. And they sinned yet more against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. Now you look at those verses, right, and it starts off with a negative, right? They were armed, they were carrying the bows, but they got turned back in the day of battle. They didn't follow God, they refused to walk in his law, they forgot his works. But then it went and it started telling you what some of those marvelous works were. How God had delivered, how God had blessed, how God had showed that he was with them, and that they were following him. Listen, this period of time was a time of mighty miracles. God was showing them, I am with you. But yet, at the end of that, it says that they sinned yet more. And it's this idea that they were a rebellious and a stubborn generation. And the psalmist earlier in this chapter said, we will tell these stories to our kid. We will tell them that are not yet born so that they can tell those that are not yet born. And it's that idea of perpetually passing it down from generation to generation, that they will share this story. And now he's actually into the part of where he's sharing the story. Now, there's a lot of discussion about verse 9, the children of Ephraim being armed and carrying bows and turned back in the day of battle. They kept not the covenant of God and refused to walk in his law and forgot his works and his wonders that he had showed them. Now there's discussion about what is that talking about. Now I will tell you that lots of times when it uses Ephraim, sometimes that's talking about the 10 tribes or things along those lines, right? But there's multiple different ways you can read that. I'm going to read you a little bit about what John Gill says, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into something. So John Gill, and I'm quoting here from John Gill's commentary, it says, some think this was what follows respects the defection of the 10 tribes in Rehoboam's time, which frequently go under the name of Ephraim. But we have no account of any battle they fought and lost by them. And besides, the history of this psalm seems to reach no further than the times of David. And he says that because when you read the rest of the psalm, it does go over a lot of history. It doesn't go over history, or doesn't seem to go over any history past David. It says, others are of the opinion that it regards the time of Eli, when the Israelites were beaten by the Philistines and the ark of God was taken. Eli's 2 sons were slain and 30,000 more. This is referencing 1 Samuel chapter 4. It says, Ephraim being put for the rest of the tribes and the ark being in that tribe. Others suppose that the affair between the Gileadites and the Ephraimites in the times of Jephthah is referred to, where there fell of the Ephraimites 42,000. That's in Judges chapter 12. Many of the Jewish writers take it to be a history of a fact that was done in Egypt before the children of Israel came out of Egypt. And then Gill goes on to say, it seems most likely, however, to respect what was done in the wilderness after they were come out of Egypt and had seen the wonders of God there and at the Red Sea and in the wilderness, and perhaps reference is had to the discomfiture of the Israelites by the Amalekites when they went up the hill and they were forbidden to do, and in which it may be the Ephraimites were most forward and suffered the most. Now there's multiple different examples given here of different times where this could be talking about the Ephraimites being turned back. I will say that, like Gill mentions, it may make the most sense that it's something that happened while they were in the wilderness, only because everything else pretty well in the chapter seems to be dealing with the children of Israel and the generation that came out of Egypt and the sin that they had in their life. Now, me personally, I'm not too hung up on it being something else. I think the principle still applies. You have a people that were supposed to be God's people, and they forgot his works, and they didn't do what he said, and they suffered the consequences because of it. Like, that's the concept. Now, if it is kind of what Gil is indicating here, I want you to read a little bit Numbers chapter 13, and we will just hit this example to show you a time and a place, whether this is what Psalms is talking about or not. This is a good example of when God's people don't follow him. Okay? There's a lot of reading, so I'm probably going to summarize part of it. At the last half of Numbers chapter 13 is when the spies return from the land of promise, right? So the children of Israel have come out of Egypt. The Lord has provided for them and done a lot of stuff for them. And they come to the place where they send spies into the promised land. And as they come back, in verse 25, it says, "And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. And they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel under the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought word back unto them and all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him and said, We came into the land, whither thou sendest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it." That sounds good. They come back and they bring these things, and they're like, "Oh, it's a great land. It's amazing. Look at the fruit." And it flows with milk and honey. And the idea of it being a rich, fruitful place, one that would supply for their needs. And then it says in verse 28, "Nevertheless, the people are strong that dwelt in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are able to overcome it." So imagine here again, the spies come back, and they talk about how great the place is, how wonderful it is, but walled cities, lots of people, giants in the land, Amalekites are thick as thieves. Like, this is bad. And most of the spies say, "We can't do this." Now, understand, the spies are saying, "We can't do this," but what they're saying we can't do is the very thing God said you can do. It's the very place God said he was going to send them. It's the whole reason they left the land of Egypt, was to come to this place. And between the time they left, actually before they left, up until this point, what are some of the things God had done? He sent plague after plague upon the land of Egypt and yet protected them. The firstborn children of those that didn't put the blood on the door were killed, but yet those that obeyed God and put the blood on the door were safe. He parted the waters at the Red Sea. He gave them water when they didn't have any. He gave them food when they didn't have any. He caused them to have a lot of blessing. And yet when they get where they're going, well, that's too big for God. I mean, that's in essence what they're saying, right? Because who was it that brought them out of Egypt? God. Who was it that parted the Red Sea? God. Who was it that gave them water? God. Who was it that sent manna from heaven? God. And yet, standing there on the brink of the promised land, we can't do it. Right? We can't do it. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it." But the men that went up with him said, "We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched of the children of Israel, saying, "The land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we are in their sight." In chapter 14, And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in the wilderness? And wherefore hath the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return unto Egypt? I was not overstating it when I said they were saying God can't do this. Because now they're basically saying, not only is God not going to give us the land, but God brought us out here to simply die by the sword. Now, why would God have delivered them from Egypt, delivered them from the armies chasing them, gave them food only to cause them to die by the sword in the land that he had promised them? We're not going to read all this, but they went further, and they basically talked about that they're going to make captains, they were going to overthrow Moses and Aaron. It was Joshua and Caleb were really the only two that stood up and said, we can't do this, like this is wrong. In verse 9, they even say, verse 8, if the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us unto this land, and give it us a land which floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not. This is the attitude the people should have had. This is the attitude of two guys that understand God's deliverance. They know who brought them out. They know who brought them to this place, and they trust him. They are looking at this not as, is it possible? But they were almost looking at it as if it's already a done deal. Those people are going to crumble before us. Don't fear them. Fear God. In verse 10, you find that the congregation actually bade stone them with stones, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before all the children of Israel. And the Lord said unto Moses, How long will this people provoke me, and how long will it be ere they believe me for all the signs which I showed among them? I will smite them with the pestilence, and disinherit them, and will make of thee a greater nation and mightier than they. And this happens, and God's wrath is kindled. And God says, I am going to wipe them off the face of the planet, and I will make a nation from you. But interestingly enough, Moses intercedes for the people. It says in verse 13, And Moses said unto the Lord, Then the Egyptians shall hear it, for thou broughtest up this people in thy might from among them. And they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land, for they have heard that thou, Lord, art among this people, that thou, Lord, art seen face to face, and that thy cloud standeth over them, and that thou goest before them by day in time in a pillar of cloud and in a pillar of fire by night. Now if thou shalt kill all this people as one man, then the nations which have heard the fame of thee will speak, saying, Because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land which he sware unto them, therefore hath he slain them in the wilderness. And now I beseech thee, let the power of my Lord be great, according as thou hast spoken, saying, The Lord is longsuffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. Pardon, I beseech thee, the iniquity of this people, according unto the greatness of thy mercy, and as thou hast forgiven this people from Egypt, even until now. Moses intercedes for the people very much in the same way that the Lord intercedes for us, right? Moses is often a picture or a type and a shadow of Christ. And Christ intercedes for you and me. And Moses steps in front and intercedes for the people, that God would forgive them, that God would pardon them, that God would be long-suffering, that he would continue to suffer through with these people that are a weak people. And in verse 20, And the Lord said, I have pardoned according to thy word, that as truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, because all these men which have seen my glory and my miracles which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tempted me now these 10 times, and have not hearkened to my voice, surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoked me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit with him, and hath followed me fully, him will I bring into the land whereunto he went, and his seed shall possess it. So Moses intercedes for the people. The Lord listens to Moses, agrees to pardon them for their sin, with the stipulation they've crossed a line. And yes, I will still show my power in them. And yes, the nations will see my power and know that it's me. But it's not going to be them. It's not going to be this generation that's used for that purpose. And these people that have rebelled against me 10 times, they aren't going to go in. It's at this time that they're told, you will not go into the promised land. You missed your chance. You missed your opportunity. I've done this and this and this and this and this for you. And time again, you serve me and you complain. And you serve me and you complain. And you serve me and you complain. And this time, I'm done. I will keep you safe. I will show you're still mine, but you will not take the land. Instead, your kids will take the land. And it is interesting to me, isn't it? A whole generation passes, and yet, what happens when they go in, the spies go in to Jericho? You remember? The people of the land feared them because of what they had heard God had done back in Egypt and how he had brought them through. You know, that's what the other spies missed. The other spies missed the fact that this land that was full of great and mighty people were actually quaking in their boots because they saw what God had done and they feared. And a whole generation later, it hasn't changed. Listen, by the time the people do go into the promised land, a whole generation has passed. But these people had not forgot what God had done. Even if the people that went through it did, the people of the land didn't, and their kids didn't. And so, as we see this, of course, we're told that they won't go in, but Caleb and others will. It says tomorrow, in verse 25, tomorrow, turn you and get you into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, how long will I bear with this evil congregation which murmur against me? I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel which they murmur against me. Say unto them, as truly as I live, saith the Lord, as ye have spoken in mine ears, so will I do to you. Your carcasses shall fall in the wilderness, and all that were numbered of you, according to your whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me. Doubtless ye shall not come into the land concerning which I swear to make you dwell therein, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones, which ye said should be a prey, them will I bring in, and they shall know the land which ye have despised. But as for you, your carcasses, they shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years, and bear your whoredoms until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. And after the number of the days in which ye search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and ye shall know my breach of promise. I, the Lord, have said, I will surely do it unto all this evil congregation that are gathered together against me in this wilderness. They shall be consumed, and there they shall die. And the men which Moses sent to search the land, who returned and made all the congregation to murmur against him by bringing up a slander upon the land, even those men that did bring up the evil report unto the land died by the plague before the Lord. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephthah, which are the men that went to search the land, lived still. Now, we're not quite done with this chapter, but you do see the judgment of God on the people that would not obey him. They wouldn't go where he said, and they didn't trust him. That's what it amounts to. They didn't trust him. Despite everything he had done for them, they didn't trust him. And I think we need to be careful. Because listen, the Lord has done much for us. The Lord has done much for us. Do we trust him? Will we follow him? Including going where it may be difficult, going where it may look like, how could we do this? But if this is what God has told us to do, we need to follow. And we need to tell our kids why we're doing it. Now, what you need to know about these people, listen, there is a repentance, and repentance is a good thing. But to repent and disobey God as a sign of saying, see, I've repented, now I'm going to go do what I should have done to begin with, actually doesn't work out well for them. Now, I'm not talking about, listen, if you get off into sin, you need to repent, and you need to go avoid that sin and do what you should do. But this is a scenario where God said, I want you to go take this land. They refused. They heard God's judgment. They were sorry that they weren't going to get the gift. And they said, oh, our mistake, our bad, now we're going to go. The problem is God had already told them, no, you won't. But see what they did. It says in verse 39, and Moses told these sayings unto all the children of Israel, and the people mourned greatly. And they rose up early in the morning and gat them up into the top of the mountain, saying, Lo, we be here, and will go unto the place which the Lord hath promised, for we have sinned. And Moses said, Wherefore now do ye transgress the commandment of the Lord? But it shall not prosper. Go not up, for the Lord is not among you, that ye be not smitten before your enemies. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites are there before you, and ye shall fall by the sword, because ye are turned away from the Lord. Therefore the Lord will not be with you. But they presumed to go up unto the hilltop. Nevertheless, the ark of the covenant of the Lord and Moses departed not out of the camp. Then the Amalekites came down, and the Canaanites which dwelt in that hill, and smote them, and discomfited them, even unto Horem. You see what happened? No, God is not with us. Why didn't God just let us die in Egypt? Why didn't God just leave us there? Matter of fact, why don't we just go back? Because God can't protect us. And then when God sent a message that said, you guys are a rebellious generation, and you won't listen even though I've done things for you time and time again. And because of it, you won't go back in. Your kids will. You won't. Matter of fact, I want you to turn around, and I want you to march back into the wilderness. So at that point, they said, oh man, we made a mistake. We sinned. We shouldn't have said that. Let's go into the land of promise because we know God gave it to us. The problem, guys, is that God just said no. The phrase, two wrongs don't make a right, pretty applicable here. You screwed up. God took away your gift. You're not going to get it back by disobeying him again. But that's what happened. And it shows the heart of this people. It shows the heart, which I think is a lot of what Psalms chapter 78 deals with, right? When you go back there and you look at these verses, The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. They kept not the covenant of God and refused to walk in his law and forgot his works and his wonders that he had showed them. Marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt. He divided the sea. He caused them to pass through. He made the waters to stand as an heap. In the daytime also he led them with a cloud and all the night with a light of fire. He clave the rocks in the wilderness and gave them to drink as out of the great depths. He brought streams out of the rock and caused waters to run like rivers. And they sinned yet more because against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. We haven't even got into all of it yet, right? This is just the first part. There's more to come about how they forgot God. But this is a good example. And that one right there that we read in Numbers chapter 13 and 14 is a good example of a rebellious, disbelieving heart. And you know what the psalmist wants his kids to know and the next generation to know? Trust God. Follow God. Serve God. Go where God sends. Do what God does, because he is marvelous. He is wonderful. He is merciful. And let me tell you all of these great things he's done. But let me also tell you about a generation of people who suffered the consequences of not believing him. And then he goes into detail of God parted the Red Sea. God led them by a pillar of cloud. God led them by a pillar of fire. God showed that he was with them. God protected them. God gave them water. You think about how much water it would take to keep that many people from dying of thirst while they wandered the wilderness. How many of you pictured that whenever God caused water to come out of the rock, like you got this picture in your mind where there's this rock and there's this, like little stream of water coming out and people are walking up getting a little sip? That's not the way Psalms describes it. Psalms describes it as like this great flowing river out of this rock. There were tons of people. And when God gave water, he gave water. And he was able to give water for the multitudes. In other words, listen, there was no chance of misunderstanding that this was a miracle. The people needed water. The people murmured about it. God suddenly caused a river to show up out of nowhere. And yet those people who saw that firsthand said, but God can't give us the land he promised. And the psalmist here is saying, God did all these things. But some of the very people that witnessed it firsthand, at every step, when it got difficult, they would say, well, God did that, but he can't do this. And then God would deliver. And then they would say, well, God did that, but he can't do this. And God would deliver. And God finally said, 10 times you've done this to me. And now you're going to suffer the consequences. And the psalmist wanted his kids, and his kids' kids, and his kids' kids' kids to know that. I talked last time how that even when they go into the land of promise and there's a miracle getting them across Jordan, when they get across, they were told that they were supposed to take 12 stones and they were supposed to make this monument of 12 stones. And the whole purpose of doing that was that in the years to come, when you were walking down by Jordan and your kid said, "What's that? Why are those stones piled up like that?" You will have the opportunity to tell them, this is what God did for us. This is how God delivered us. This is how God showed that He was with us. And it's an opportunity to pass along that information to your kids. And then again, that idea that even when the generation passes that didn't know that, well, the kid can tell the grandkid, well, when I was here, I asked the same question. And you know what your grandfather told me? Your grandfather told me about this time when the Lord parted the river and we came across and the Lord delivered and the Lord did mighty things. And as you go on beyond that, city after city after city was conquered. Cities that were walled and mightier than the people that were coming in. But yet God was with them and God gave the land to them. And then they might tell them about the commands that had been given and the law that had been given. And they might teach them about the concepts of the Passover. That's the God we serve. The God that told us to do this Passover thing is the God that delivered us from Egypt. But I wonder how many times they would have maybe sat down and told that great-great-grandkid, how many times they would have said, this is what God did. But do you know there was a whole generation of people that stood on the border of this promised land and didn't get to come in because they didn't believe God could do it? And you know what happened to them? They had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until they all died. And then their kids came in and took the land. And then you had a guy like Caleb and Joshua. I mean, what is it? Like Caleb had to be like 80 years old or something. And yet he was right there in the midst of the battle. Right? He felt the same way 40 years later that he did when he was standing there at the border saying, we should go in. And you just wonder, like, how much of the story did generation after generation hear as they walked by those 12 stones? So, how are you doing this today? How are you telling the generation that's just now coming up, this is who God is. This is His character. These are His commands. This is His message. This is what He's done for me. This is the consequences that I've seen in both the Word and practically seen from those that don't follow Him. And here's why we do what we do. Are we doing that? Right? This whole chapter, you're going to hear me say this multiple times as we go through this chapter. This chapter is giving us example after example of where God did amazing things and a generation of people ignored Him, didn't believe Him, didn't follow Him. And it is supposed to be a witness to the generations to come. All right. We're going to go ahead and end there. We'll ask Brother Philip to come and lead us in a song.